over the years, I have noted that there is a universal progress culture that is subscribed to generally by Jews, by Confucians, by Protestants, by some smaller groups such as the Ismaili Muslims, the Catholic Basques, the Jains in India, and so forth. These are religions or ethical codes, because Confucianism, of course, is not a religion but an ethical code, that emphasize work, achievement, education, saving, merit, and so forth. And in those elements of culture, one finds a common denominator that works for people as varied as Chinese, Swedes, Americans, Australians, people from Barbados. Barbados is an island in the Caribbean which was settled by the British, who imported slaves from the West African region of Dahomey. Over the years until 1966, when Barbados became independent, the descendants of the slaves increasingly adopted the culture of their masters. And by the time that they achieved independence, they controlled the politics of the society and a good part of the economy, and were no longer African slaves. They were black Englishmen, and are so referred to as Afro-Saxons or black Englishmen. Haiti, which was a French slave colony, in which the French imported their slaves from the same region of Africa, the Dahomey region, today Benin. Haiti became independent in the wake of a slave uprising in 1804, and has lived the tragic life of a combination of African culture and slave culture, which has left it as really a failed society. So the lesson from this is that culture matters, race doesn't. Now, to go back to the title, Jews, Confucians, and Protestants share in universal culture, and they achieve in different environments, different skin colors, not only economically, but also in terms of the full three objectives of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which are democratic governance, social justice, and an end to poverty. And in all respects, those three groups tend to move more rapidly towards those goals than a lot of other groups. If we look at the Islamic societies, and let's take the Arab societies, let's take Iraq as a good example. One of the greatest errors in U.S. history was the invasion of Iraq, in the sense that it was predicated on the assumption not only that the American troops would be welcome, but that they could facilitate an early transition to full democracy. And that, of course, has been substantially disproven. And it's been disproven in a way that makes a compelling argument that Islam in general, Arab culture in specific, has great difficulty responding to the objectives of the UN Universal Declaration. There is no Arab country that is approaching democratic continuity. The levels of social justice are, well, particularly for women, are terrible. In all the Arab countries, there's a great difference between the levels of education achieved by men and the levels of education achieved by women. In Egypt, for example, 75 to 80% of the men are literate, and 50% of the women are literate. So this is an example of how culture works against people. So this addresses the question that is in the subtitle of my new book, because this is not only the title of the lecture today or the discussion today, but a book that I'm working on. The lesson is that some cultures are more prone to progress than others, which means that they are inclined to possess more what I will call cultural capital. Now, at the session before this, Maria Matitskaya, is she here? She is. She talked about cultural capital, but in a quite limited sense. And in the sense of culture as high culture, in art, literature, music, as well as in antiquities. And I wonder if that wasn't, Maria, the basis of a conference that the World Bank held in 2000 in Italy. It was, I believe. Yes, that's the conference where my friend and colleague David Landis, the author of The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, mentioned that there were such things as toxic cultures. And he caused a great disturbance with that comment. The World Bank is very reluctant to address culture, and certainly not in the sense that some cultures are toxic. Okay, let me just check here. I'm going to go now to the first handout, which is the typology of progress-prone, progress-resistant cultures. And it's under the section of cultural capital defined, and specifically disaggregating culture. And it looks like this. Mm-hmm. Do you all have copies? I think this gentleman may not.
Маша, больше нет копий? Нету.
Are there some left?
Нету. Кончились.
Perhaps we can arrange.
Есть у вас? Вот дайте, кому не хватает. Вон там.
The architect of this typology is an Argentine intellectual and media celebrity, Mariano Grondona, who used it in his book, The Cultural Conditions of Economic Development. And this also appears in his chapter in Culture Matters. His focus for the purposes of his book was on economic development. Several of us have expanded it to incorporate political and social development. So there are now 25 factors that serve as a definition of cultural capital. The two columns were intended by Grondona to be based on his knowledge of Argentina as the progress-resistant or low cultural capital culture. And the United States, he knows very well, he's taught at Harvard, among other things, is fluent in English, was representative of the high cultural capital column. So let me just make a couple of comments about cultural capital as it's defined here. Basically, these 25 factors form a definition of cultural capital when you're in the progress-prone column. Cultural capital is not yet accepted in the same categories as capital as defined by Adam Smith and Karl Marx, or human capital as described by Gary Becker, the economist who won the Nobel Prize for it, nor as social capital which perhaps Francis Fukuyama's book was mentioned at the prior session, but actually I think that Robert Putnam's book, Making Democracy Work, was the most powerful restatement of social capital. Would you raise your hand if any of you are familiar with Robert Putnam's Making Democracy Work? Wow. It is not? There is. You should all take a look at it. What it does is, and it's filled with data, it takes the decision of the Italian government in the 1970s to decentralize governance in Italy. And that led to a great deal of data production. And the data gets fully analyzed in the book and establishes a clear separation between the north of Italy and the south of Italy. And the performance is so different that it sort of documents the argument of those in the north who would like to separate the north from the south. And in the process of seeing these very distinct separate paths, Putnam asked the question, why is it so different? After all, it is supposed to be one society. And he traces back the problems of the South with democracy, social justice, and poverty to the Norman occupation of Italy in the 10th and 11th centuries. The Normans got around to a lot of places, among them Russia, of course. I think I'm correct in saying that the name Russia has Norman origins. The Normans, of course, being Scandinavians, basically Swedes. In the north, there was a spontaneous emergence of communes about the same time as the Normans occupied the south of Italy. And these two developments of a millennium ago started processes of cultural differentiation that he concluded were at the heart of the explanation of the differences between the north and the south in Italy. And he focused on the question of social capital. That is, in his judgment, or in his definition, the extent to which a society encourages association. And the North association comes naturally. The South, it is very, very difficult to find. And the mafia is one expression of that absence of social capital. Have any of you read the book by, let's see, it's called The Moral Basis of a Backward Society by Edward Banfield? It's another very important book for us culturalists. Edward Banfield was a professor at Harvard, and he has an Italian-American wife. He visited a small village in the southern part of Italy in the 1950s, having just come from a study of a Mormon community in Utah in the United States. And he discovered in Utah a honeycomb of organizations for not only for religious purposes, but for social purposes, political purposes, sports, entertainment, just about everything. There was an organization in it. He got to this Italian town, which is called Chiaromonte, although he gives it a fictitious name, Montegrano, and there was no organization whatsoever. The whole society was based on the nuclear family. The radius of identification and trust stopped at the nuclear family. Putnam makes extensive use of Banfield's work, and once again, Banfield is sort of the father, one of the fathers of cultural theory. Those of you who have seen Culture Matters may recall that it is dedicated to him. He died at the time it was published. So that's cultural capital, and let's take a look now at this typology. Let me mention that it is an idealized typology. It's in black and white when the real world is shades of gray. In all societies, you will find people who are identifiable as in either column. It's a question of where the center of gravity in the society lies. And you'll find that generally societies tend towards one or the other column. So I'm going to pause now and let you look at it, and then we can talk about it. To my knowledge, this is the most detailed definition of culture that exists. Some people may judge it to be too detailed. As a matter of fact, we have been, in several similar conferences, we've been asked, well, what are the really important ones? And they are all important, but some really are more important than others. And so let me give you my take on which are the ones that are crucial, because they usually echo in several of the others. Religion is probably the most powerful communicator of values and attitudes. It's not the only one. The environment is a source of values and attitudes. History is a source of values and attitudes. For example, that Haiti was started as a French slave colony has left a strong imprint on it. But even stronger is the imprint of African culture, and above all, the voodoo religion. So let me just make a couple of comments about religion. We have a tendency to regard all religions as being equal. This is a reflection of cultural relativism, which has been a dominant feature of the social sciences and above all anthropology for many, many years. I would have to say that were I an anthropological professor sending a student into the field for the first time to do an ethnographic study, that I would encourage that person to adopt cultural relativism, certainly to cleanse him or herself of his or her own cultural predilections, so that he or she can do a conscientious job of depicting, clarifying, and explaining the culture which he or she is studying, without carrying the baggage of his or her own culture. That's fine. But when it comes to measuring the success of cultures in producing good or not so good societies, then the whole question of cultural relativism falls apart, because it's clear from the example that I gave you at the outset, comparing Haiti and Barbados, that some cultures produce more progress towards the goals of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights than others. And since religion is an important contributor to some of the fundamental value bases of a culture, religious relativism simply does not work for our purposes. The question of the ability to influence one's destiny is often linked to religion. Fatalism is a common characteristic of lagging societies. Those of you who may speak Spanish may have heard the expression "si Dios quiere," if God wills. Or those of you who may speak Arabic may have heard "inshallah," God willing. Those are indicators of a lack of control of destiny. Control of destiny is, in the case of Haiti, something totally out of the control of the individual, except through one technique. Haiti is identified often as a Catholic society. It really isn't. It's a voodoo society. And voodoo is a religion without ethical content, in which hundreds of spirits control destiny. And the spirits are very capricious and human. And the only way that you can gain any leverage on them is by propitiating them through voodoo ceremonies, which means dealing with the voodoo priest or priestess. And the result is a sense of loss of agency, loss of control, a sense of desperation, a sense of mistrust. The mistrust levels in Haiti are among the lowest in the world. Wealth, for purposes of economic development, is a very important differentiation point. For cultures that are rich in cultural capital, wealth is something that gets created by human beings, and it is not zero-sum. It can be created and is not subject to the limits of what exists. For the low cultural capital culture, the reverse is the case. Wealth exists, and life is a struggle to divide it. Moving to the values and virtues, the ethical code is important. I would say it's among the very most important because it is the basis of trust. The ethical code that Max Weber dealt with in his great book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, differentiated Catholic from Protestant faith by noting that for the Catholics, one could sin, confess, be absolved, and start again to sin. The Protestants had to live their lives every day doing good deeds, and there was no release from that. This may be an oversimplification, but it is generally true that ethics and the reflection of ethics in human behavior, which is importantly trust, an extension, if you will, of the golden rule to human interaction, is particularly noteworthy in the Nordic countries, where trust reaches. I'm now referring to the World Values Survey question, can people in general be trusted? In Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, 60 to 65% of the people answer yes. In Brazil, 3% of the people answer yes. And trust is not only an indispensable element in a working democracy, it's also an indispensable element for economic efficiency. It also has a lot to do with social justice. Education, the value attached to education is of high importance as well. And this is one of the major issues right now that the United States is forced to deal with because of the heavy flow of immigrants from Latin America, above all from Mexico. The immigrants from Mexico into California, for example, where I am currently, are dropping out of high school at the rate of about 40%, which means that for every 100 kids that enter high school, only 60 are graduating. For Confucians, Jews, and Protestants, the rate is like 95 out of 100. And this is something which persists in the case of the Mexican immigrants over the generations, the 4th, 5th, 6th generation. So it's a major problem. And in Mexico, it's even worse. Something like only fewer than 40% of high school age kids actually come out with a high school diploma. That's typical of Latin America more generally.
два слова. Дорогие друзья, вот я бы хотел, чтобы мы оценили с вами итог, так сказать, исследований в определенной области. Я очень старался, и особенно Маша Снеговая, чтобы Лоренс Харрисон приехал к нам. Я ему очень благодарен за то, что он согласился к нам приехать, потому что я был покорен не только его умом, но и эмоциональной силой, с которой он пишет об этих проблемах. Мы специально перевели, может быть, самые важные его книги, может быть, еще важнее будут написаны, для того, чтобы русский читатель мог знакомиться с этой литературой. Но я хочу обратить внимание, что исследования в этой области, которые начаты многими, ну не многими, но по крайней мере с разными людьми совершенно независимо, они только начинаются. И что, мне кажется, показали эти исследования? Это то, что несмотря на многообразие культур и безусловное равноправие всех культур с точки зрения, так сказать, того, что они представляют некое достояние определенного общества, в то же время мы должны сказать, что благосостояние людей зависит от того, какова культура. И что есть еще понятие культурной отсталости, которое нужно преодолевать и у нас, и у многих других людей, стран. И те люди, которые, так сказать, ну как бы коснеют в своем нежелании меняться, это трудно, это все понимают, они рискуют, потому что это вопрос конкурентоспособности, это, если хотите, вопрос выживания. Я хочу подчеркнуть одну мысль, что эти исследования только начинаются. И в самом начале они выяснили, что все-таки позволяют понять, что есть некие универсальные рамки, которые можно определить, в рамках которых можно производить определенные измерения, делать сопоставления, потом и делать соответствующие выводы. Мы знаем уже о некоторых попытках измерить фактор культуры и попытаться вставить его в производственную функцию. Я не знаю, получится или не получится, но ничего такого необыкновенного в этом нет, потому что были как бы многие попытки, сейчас мы видим эти попытки в рамках проекта «Клемс», где там анализируют самые невероятные факторы по той простой причине, что появляются измеримые данные. Вот. И я должен сказать, что профессор Харрисон является одним из пионеров этого направления, поэтому для нас большая честь. Я хочу пожелать ему доброго здоровья, успехов. И, так сказать, хотелось бы дружить, и чтобы мы здесь тоже этими исследованиями занимаемся. Я тешу себя надеждой, что в рамках высшей школы, или, так сказать, не в рамках, а именно, может быть, на основе высшей школы, рядом с ней и в других центрах будет в России продвинутое направление, и мы будем способствовать ликвидации собственной культурной отсталости. Мне кажется, это очень существенно. Thank you very much, профессор.
We are already friends.